The sea can shift from calm beauty to chaos in a single heartbeat. What began as a joyful glass-bottom boat tour near Gansbai suddenly unraveled when a massive great white struck with terrifying force. In seconds, the vessel shattered, hurling 5 tourists into the predator's domain. What followed was a desperate fight for survival against the ocean's most feared hunter. From shocking boat encounters to near-fatal attacks, in this video, we'll explore several chilling true stories of shark attacks that prove why the ocean is never without danger. On July 1, 2025, the coastline of Gansbai, South Africa, was alive with tourists eager to explore the marine world. Among them was a small group of 5 Europeans who had chosen a glass-bottom boat tour to witness the rich ocean life from above. 3 of them were German travelers who had been close friends since university, sharing a love for outdoor adventures and yearly trips together. Alongside them was a French visitor, a schoolteacher who enjoyed photography, and an Italian engineer who had always dreamed of seeing sharks in their natural environment. They came from different paths, yet their shared excitement for the experience bound all. The glass-bottom boat was chosen for its promise of safety and clear views, allowing them to enjoy the beauty of the sea without actually entering it. None could have imagined that the same feature meant to delight them would soon place them in mortal danger. The morning began calmly. The ocean shimmered under the bright sky, waves rolling gently against the vessel. The tourists leaned over the glass panels, watching schools of fish dart below, their silver bodies flashing with sunlight. The crew explained the surrounding waters, known worldwide for their large predators, but the visitors felt reassured within the sturdy cabin. They took photographs, pointing excitedly at the life below, unaware of the shadow that was moving closer from the depths. Suddenly, the calm was shattered. A massive great white shark, measuring more than 22 feet, surged upward with violent speed. Its immense body rammed the underside of the boat, sending a booming shock through the hull. The impact was catastrophic. The glass panels cracked in an instant, then exploded into fragments as seawater rushed through the broken floor. Tourists screamed as the cabin filled with debris and cold waves. The boat rocked violently, tipping as the predator circled beneath. Thrown into chaos, the passengers lost their balance and were dragged into the open sea. One German tourist struggled to stay afloat, only to feel the crushing bite of the predator clamping onto his arm. Blood spilled into the water as he thrashed helplessly. Another traveler, caught in the frenzy, was bitten on the leg, his body twisting in agony as the shark's serrated teeth tore through flesh. The others scrambled, clinging to floating wreckage, their eyes wide with terror as the predator lunged again. The crew fought desperately from the deck, hurling poles and firing flares toward the water. The predator thrashed angrily, its dorsal fin slicing through the waves as it circled the cluster of survivors. Each strike from the crew bought only seconds of relief before the predator surged back, determined to press its attack. The ocean boiled with blood and foam as the tourists struggled against panic and exhaustion, their fate hanging in the balance on the thin chance of rescue. The predator circled closer still, its shadow cutting across the wreckage, and the battle between man and beast was far from over. Then, at the edge of the chaos, rescue boats rushed in, their engines roaring across the waves. Crew leaned out, hurling ropes and poles into the bloodied water, while flares burst overhead to drive the predator back. The shark lunged once more, snapping its jaws at drifting debris, but the noise and light forced it to veer away. The opening gave rescuers the chance they needed to pull the first victim aboard, his arm torn and bleeding heavily. Another was hauled in moments later, his leg wrapped hastily with cloth to slow the loss of blood. The sea churned as the remaining tourists clung to wreckage, shivering and wide-eyed. Crew members formed a line with poles, striking the surface as the predator circled again, unwilling to give up its hunt. At last, with a final sweep of its tail, it slid into the deeper blue, leaving only red streaks and floating fragments behind. Relief swept over the survivors, though fear still gripped them tightly as they were pulled one by one to safety. The glass-bottom boat that had promised wonder now sat half-submerged, its broken panels a grim reminder of how quickly joy could collapse into terror. On deck, the scene was urgent and frantic. Bandages were wrapped tightly around gaping wounds, hands pressed firmly against bleeding flesh, while seawater streamed off their trembling bodies. 2 of the victims drifted in and out of consciousness, their faces pale from blood loss, while the others sat in shock, unable to speak. Rescue boats sped toward shore, their passengers staring blankly at the horizon, as if expecting the shadow to return. Every crash of a wave against the hull made them flinch, the memory of teeth and blood still vivid in their minds. When they reached land, ambulances waited. Medical crews rushed forward, lifting stretchers and securing the injured with practiced speed. Sirens wailed as they were driven to the nearest hospital, leaving behind tourists and locals gathered at the pier in stunned silence. News of the attack spread quickly, sparking fear among travelers and concern from experts who explained that large predators sometimes struck small vessels without warning. They reminded the public that, despite safety measures, encounters with such powerful animals could never be fully controlled. For the survivors, the memory would remain far longer than the physical wounds. The German tourist who had nearly lost his arm faced months of recovery, his once strong body marked permanently by the scars of the encounter. His companion, bitten on the leg, required surgery to repair muscle torn by serrated teeth. The others carried bruises and cuts, but the deeper wounds were etched in their minds. Laughter that once echoed across the waves had been replaced with silence, and dreams of clear waters were shadowed by fear. The tour that had begun as a glimpse into the beauty of the ocean ended as a lesson in its raw power, a reminder that beneath the surface, survival is never guaranteed. On February 2, 2025, the icy waters around Svalbard drew crowds of people eager for the thrill of a polar plunge. Among them was 32-year-old Ingrid Solberg, a Norwegian swimmer who had built much of her life around cold water sports. Raised in Tromsø, she had grown used to long winters and freezing seas, often testing her endurance against conditions that would drive most indoors. Over the years, she had joined winter swimming clubs, competed in Arctic marathons, and encouraged others to embrace the challenges of the natural world. To her, diving into ice-cold water was not only about physical stamina, but also about mental strength, a way to prove resilience in places where the environment seemed unforgiving. That morning, she stood at the shoreline alongside hundreds of others, each wrapped in thick jackets before stripping down for the plunge. The event was lively, with laughter and anticipation carrying through the crisp air. Organizers had arranged safety crews and boats and medical staff on standby, prepared for the shock that frigid waters could bring to the human body. Participants knew the risks of hypothermia, cramps, and exhaustion, but few imagined danger could come from beneath the surface. The sea looked calm, its dark surface broken only by small ripples caused by wind and ice flows drifting along the fjord. When the signal was given, the crowd surged forward, splashing into the water in groups. Ingrid moved with confidence, her breath sharp against the cold as she pushed further from the shallows. Around her, the air filled with shouts and gasps, the shock of near-freezing temperatures hitting every swimmer at once. Beneath, bubbles and turbulence spread widely, carrying vibrations into the depths. The spectacle was meant to be short-lived, a burst of adrenaline before retreating quickly back to shore. But within the gloom below, movement stirred. From the deep shadows, a Greenland shark emerged, its massive frame moving with slow, precise movements. These creatures, known for their size and long lifespan, usually kept to the dark and cold, scavenging quietly. Yet the frenzy above had caught its attention. Splashes, flashing limbs, and faint traces of blood from small scratches created a trail that pulled the animal closer. It glided upward with deliberate motions, its pale eyes fixed on the commotion. Ingrid, unaware of what lurked beneath, stretched her arms forward, her strokes steady against the resistance of the cold water. Then, without warning, the immense shape brushed close. The predator turned sharply and lunged. Its powerful jaws snapped shut around her arm, clamping with a sudden nip that pierced through muscle and wetsuit. Shock shot through her body as the pressure jolted her backward, water rushing over her face. The sea erupted into chaos. Nearby swimmers screamed and thrashed, trying to push the animal away by splashing violently. The sound of panic carried across the fjord as safety crews shouted and waved, urging everyone toward the shore. The predator released and lingered for a moment, circling just beyond reach, its massive body twisting with unsettling calm. Ingrid clutched her wounded arm, her breath ragged as she fought to stay upright in the freezing surf. Every second dragged as shouts filled the air and organizers rushed into the water to guide swimmers back to shore. The shadow beneath lingered, its curiosity unbroken, making the icy expanse feel suddenly hostile. The plunge that had begun as a celebration now teetered on the edge of tragedy. the threat below far more dangerous than the cold that gripped their skin. The water churned as organizers rushed into action, pulling swimmers back toward the shore with urgent movements. Ingrid clutched her injured arm, every stroke sending waves of pain through her body, yet she forced herself forward, driven by instinct to survive. Safety crews extended ropes and flotation boards, guiding her and others closer to the icy beach. Behind them, the massive shadow of the Greenland shark lingered, circling slowly before fading back into the deeper fjord. The danger had passed, but the sense of fear hung heavy in the frozen air. On shore, the scene turned to controlled urgency. Medics wrapped Ingrid in thick blankets to fight the cold while applying pressure to her arm, where deep punctures and bruising marked the point of contact. Her skin was pale, her body trembling not only from the freezing water but also from shock. Around her, other participants huddled together, many shivering and whispering anxiously as they realized how close the event had come to ending in disaster. The festive spirit of the plunge had vanished, replaced by an awareness of how vulnerable they had been. Officials moved quickly to secure the area. The event was called off and the remaining swimmers were ushered away from the water's edge. Organizers explained that though Greenland sharks were often scavengers, their presence in shallow fjords could never be ignored, especially when large groups created noise and splashing. The crowd stood silently, some staring out at the dark sea, while others held their phones to capture the aftermath of what had just unfolded. The quiet weight of the moment pressed down on everyone who had witnessed the sudden appearance of the predator. Ingrid was transported to a nearby clinic, where doctors cleaned and dressed her wounds. The bite had not crushed bone, but the torn flesh and deep bruises would require weeks to heal. She lay resting as staff monitored her temperature, ensuring hypothermia did not take hold. News of the incident spread quickly across the region, carried by word of mouth and local media. What had begun as a cheerful celebration of endurance became a warning that echoed across Arctic communities. Experts spoke publicly in the days that followed, emphasizing that Greenland sharks rarely seek out humans. Instead, unusual activity such as splashing, the scent of blood, or strange vibrations can attract them out of curiosity. The incident was described as a rare but sobering reminder that even in frozen waters, humans remain guests in a world where predators hold the upper hand. For Ingrid, the aftermath left both relief and reflection. She had survived, but the memory of pale eyes rising from the gloom stayed vivid in her mind. The polar plunge would continue as tradition for others, but for her and those who stood nearby that day, the event would forever be tied to the haunting image of a predator appearing where few expected it. On November 3, 2022, the golden sun of Mozambique reflected across the waters near Tofo Beach, where tourists gathered for another day of adventure. Among them was 27-year-old Camille Dupont, a French social media figure who had built a following by sharing bold challenges and daring activities. Raised in Lyon, she had grown up surrounded by city life, yet her passion was always for travel and new experiences. By her mid-20s, Camille had become known for combining fashion, lifestyle, and extreme outdoor moments into content that her fans loved. Her energy, humor, and eye for spectacle earned her recognition online, while also encouraging her to push limits in pursuit of memorable clips. Traveling with friends through southern Africa, she had chosen Tofo Beach as a highlight of her trip. The area was renowned for its reefs, diverse marine life, and crystal-clear waters. Yet it was also known among locals as a place where predators roamed near shallow feeding grounds. Fishermen often warned of tiger sharks that followed bait fish close to shore. Camille, however, focused on creating a scene that would grab attention. She had brought along a bright inflatable slide designed to attach to the side of a boat. The plan was simple: slide off dramatically, splash into the water, and capture every second on video. Her group anchored their vessel near a reef, its surface broken by schools of darting fish below. The inflatable was secured quickly, cameras prepared, and excitement filled the air. Camille, dressed in a colorful swimsuit and neoprene for extra buoyancy, climbed to the top of the slide. The ocean shimmered beneath her, calm yet alive with hidden movement. She raised her hands, signaling to her friends before launching herself down the slick surface. The entry was dramatic, just as she had planned. She struck the water with force, splashing wide across the reef shallows, yet the motion and the colors instantly attracted attention below. A massive tiger shark, lurking close to the reef, surged upward with explosive speed. The predator slammed into the inflatable with such power that the structure bent and twisted, startling those still on board. At the same moment, its jaws closed around Camille's torso. The water erupted in chaos. Camille struggled violently, kicking and twisting as the shark thrashed side to side. Her friends screamed from the deck, filming equipment clattering into the sea as they struck the water with cameras and paddles in panic. Foam and blood spread through the surface as the predator dragged her down. The inflatable sagged, half deflated, rocking wildly against the side of the boat. Seconds stretched into horror. Each thrash pulled her deeper, her body jerking helplessly against the weight of the predator's grip. The frantic splashing of her companions failed to deter the shark. Beneath the surface, her figure vanished into red-stained water. The ocean, moments before filled with laughter, now roared with violence, leaving those on board paralyzed with terror. The water quieted again, broken only by ripples and the remains of torn gear drifting in the tide. What had begun as a light-hearted stunt had turned into a nightmare. The predator had disappeared into the deep, carrying Camille with it, while her stunned companions clutched at the side of the boat, staring at the sea that had claimed her. The silence that followed in November 2022 near Tofo Beach was heavier than the sound of waves. Camille's friends clung to the sides of the boat in disbelief, staring at the torn inflatable and the red water slowly spreading across the reef. For long moments, no one moved, their shock holding them frozen in place. The sea seemed almost calm again, yet beneath its surface it had carried away a young woman who had been so full of life only minutes earlier. Panic finally gave way to desperate action. Calls were made on radios, distress flares were fired into the sky, and nearby boats began to converge on the area. Fishermen and local rescuers scanned the waters, searching for any sign of the missing swimmer. Hours passed, with nets dragged and divers lowered carefully into the reef, but the ocean revealed nothing. All that was recovered were fragments of neoprene, sections of the slide, and blood-stained foam that drifted in the current. The vast sea had erased nearly every trace of the violent encounter. On shore, the news spread quickly. Locals shook their heads in sorrow, noting how often warnings were ignored by those unfamiliar with the region's predatory habits. Tiger sharks were known to patrol the shallows, drawn by baitfish and sudden disturbances. Experts explained that bright colors, erratic splashes, and unusual movement often triggered investigative attacks. What had been planned as a lighthearted display had instead created the exact conditions that invited a hunter to strike. Camille's family, who had been contacted back in France, faced the devastating truth. With no remains returned, the loss was made sharper by the absence of closure. Messages flooded social platforms where she had once shared her daily adventures. Followers expressed grief, shock, and disbelief that someone who lived so brightly had been taken in an instant. Fellow travelers laid flowers along the beach in Mozambique, marking the place where her story had ended. Authorities responded with stronger warnings, urging tourists to avoid stunts or playful behavior in areas rich in predators. Signs were posted at popular access points along the reef, reminding swimmers and boaters of the dangers that lurked unseen. Organizers of local tours emphasized the need for caution, stressing that shallow waters were not entirely risk-free. The tragedy became a lesson repeated by guides and safety officers alike. For her companions, the images of that day remained etched in their memories. The laughter, the bright inflatable, the sudden violence, and the silence that followed formed a chain of moments impossible to forget. Tofo Beach carried on with the rhythm of tides, but for those who had been there, the ocean would never look the same again. On August 4, 2024, the vast blue waters of the Indian Ocean stretched endlessly as a luxury cruise ship glided near the Seychelles. Among the passengers was 12-year-old Matteo Ricci, a cheerful Italian boy who had come on the voyage with his parents. Back home, Matteo had been known for his boundless energy, often playing soccer with his friends in the streets of his neighborhood. His adventurous spirit made him curious about everything around him, whether it was climbing trees, exploring rocky paths, or leaning too far over railings to get a better view. The trip to the Seychelles had been meant as a summer escape, a chance for the family to enjoy the ocean, sunshine, and the vibrant marine life the region was famous for. Matteo loved standing on the decks, watching flying fish scatter over the waves or dolphins racing alongside the ship. On that morning, the sea was calm, the horizon a perfect line where sky met water. Tourists strolled along the open decks, enjoying the breeze. Mateo, like many children, could not resist testing boundaries. He climbed partway onto the railing, eager to peer down at the ocean below. His small hands gripped the edge, his feet shifting on the metal bar. Then, in one slip, balance failed him. With a sudden gasp, his body pitched forward, and he fell headfirst into the open sea. The splash was small compared to the size of the ship, but those closest to him screamed and pointed. In the water, Mateo flailed, his arms and legs moving frantically as he tried to stay afloat. The fall had scraped his skin, leaving faint streaks of blood that dissolved into the surrounding waves. The disturbance did not go unnoticed. From the deep, a shadow emerged. An oceanic white-tip shark, broad-finned and built for open-water dominance, had sensed both the splashing and the scent. Known for boldness and opportunism, this species often approached anything that seemed like potential prey. With slow, circling movements, it closed in on the boy. Mateo kicked desperately, his cries muffled by the waves, but the predator surged with sudden force. Its jaws clamped onto his leg, teeth tearing through skin and muscle as it shook side to side. Above, crew members on deck spotted the attack. Alarms rang out, life rings thrown rapidly into the sea, while others rushed to prepare rescue boats. Flares ignited and streaked across the water, trying to distract the predator. Below, the shark circled again, drawn by the blood and frantic movement. Mateo twisted and struck out, trying to break free, the water around him turning red as the massive fins cut close. The ocean had turned from playground to battlefield in seconds. Every heartbeat meant survival, every moment stretching as rescuers raced to reach the boy before the circling predator struck again. The flares hissed across the surface, sending bright streaks of light that unsettled the predator long enough to ease its grip. The sudden distraction gave rescuers precious seconds. The massive fins cut a wide arc, circling with slow menace, but crew members on the ship threw more life rings into the water, thrashing them loudly to draw attention away. Mateo drifted weakly toward one of the flotation devices, his body trembling and his face pale. The leg wound bled heavily, painting the sea around him in streaks of red. A rescue boat lowered quickly, its engine roaring as it cut through the waves. Crew leaned out with poles and ropes, shouting and striking the water to maintain distance from the shark. The predator made another pass, its broad fins rising above the swells, but the combined noise and flares forced it to retreat farther into the depths. With quick precision, rescuers reached Mateo, pulling him onto the small boat. His body shook from cold and shock, his breathing ragged as blood pooled beneath him. The rescue team worked frantically to slow the bleeding. Strips of cloth were tied tightly above the wound, and pressure was applied to keep him conscious. His wide eyes stared at the deck, his hands trembling as if still reaching for the rail he had lost. Within minutes, he was sped back to the larger vessel, where medical staff were waiting with bandages, fluids, and oxygen. Every moment mattered, and the crew knew that his survival depended on immediate action. As the cruise ship turned back toward port, news of the accident spread quickly among passengers. Families gathered in silence, their earlier joy replaced by dread. Parents held their children close, staring uneasily at the dark sea that had turned so dangerous. Staff members comforted those who had witnessed the fall, their own hands still shaking as they replayed the sight of the shark circling a child. When the vessel reached land, emergency responders rushed Mateo to a nearby hospital. Surgeons worked late into the night, repairing torn muscles and reconnecting blood vessels. Though his injuries were severe, they managed to stabilize him. Doctors warned of a long recovery, but the fact that he had survived at all was considered remarkable. In the days that followed, experts reviewed the incident, noting the opportunistic nature of oceanic white-tip sharks in open water. They explained how splashing, minor blood trails, and isolation in the sea created the perfect conditions for a predator to investigate. The accident became a reminder not only for cruise operators but for travelers everywhere that the ocean, however calm it appears, always carries hidden risks. For Mateo, the ordeal left scars deeper than his wounds. His family remained by his side, grateful for his survival, yet burdened by the memory of how close the sea had come to claiming him. The story spread widely, serving as both a warning and a lesson that even moments of curiosity can turn into battles for life when the ocean's most relentless hunters appear. On January 5, 2025, the coast of Gansbai glistened beneath bright skies as tourists gathered for a parasailing excursion. Among them was Lucas Schneider, a 34-year-old German traveler who had always sought adventure wherever he went. Raised in Munich, Lucas had spent much of his youth skiing in the Alps, cycling long mountain trails, and swimming in Bavarian lakes. His love for the outdoors carried into adulthood, where he balanced work as a software engineer with frequent trips abroad. Friends described him as calm yet daring, someone who preferred experiences that combined beauty with adrenaline. Parasailing over the South African coastline seemed the perfect blend, offering both thrill and serenity. That morning, Lucas strapped into the harness with steady hands, listening as the crew checked ropes and prepared the canopy. The boat roared forward, the sail unfurling above him like a great wing, pulling him higher until he hovered above the turquoise water. From his vantage point, the sweeping coastline, dotted with cliffs and coves, looked unreal. Below him, schools of fish shimmered silver as they darted through the surf. The ocean seemed calm, but beneath its surface, predators moved unseen. As the boat slowed near a dense patch of baitfish, Lucas dangled lower than recommended, his legs swaying just above the rolling waves. The guides maneuvered carefully, giving tourists a closer view of the teeming marine life below. Yet the decision brought unexpected danger. Drawn by the commotion, a massive great white shark, nearly 18 feet long, cruised upward from deeper water. Its body cut through the current with precision, the shadow unmistakable against the lighter surface. In an instant, the predator surged, striking the dangling parasail rope with explosive force. Water erupted in a violent splash, the line shuddering as Lucas was jolted forward. His leg brushed the predator's rough skin before powerful jaws snapped shut, grazing his thigh and scraping muscle in a brief but brutal strike. Pain seared through him as he thrashed against the harness, the predator's weight pulling the rope taut. The boat crew reacted instantly. Flares shot across the surface, hissing and cracking as smoke filled the air. The sudden light and sound disrupted the predator's focus, forcing it to veer off. The captain turned sharply, cutting the boat away from the shark's path. The parasail line straining as Lucas was lifted higher from the foaming water. Blood streaked his leg, but he clung tightly, trembling in shock as the crew scrambled to stabilize the situation. Though the predator slipped back beneath the waves, the sight of its massive dorsal fin cutting the water remained seared into the minds of all who witnessed it. The calm aerial ride had transformed in seconds into a desperate fight for survival, and Lucas now hung suspended above the sea, injured but alive. At the same time, the crew worked furiously to bring him to safety. The rope tightened as the boat pulled Lucas higher, lifting him away from the spray that still churned where the predator had struck. His body swayed in the harness, blood trailing from his leg. But the immediate threat had faded into the depths below. Crew members focused on reeling him in quickly, guiding the parasail back toward the deck. When his feet touched the boards at last, helping hands rushed forward, easing him down with care as the sail collapsed onto the surface of the sea. The adrenaline that had kept him rigid began to drain, leaving him pale and trembling while the crew pressed cloth tightly against the torn flesh on his thigh. The wound was severe but clean enough for rapid treatment. Layers of soaked bandages were changed repeatedly as the bleeding slowed. The smell of smoke still lingered from the flares, mingling with the salty air as the vessel turned toward shore. Every face aboard carried the same stunned expression, the disbelief of witnessing how close the ocean had come to claiming another life. Lucas lay quiet, eyes open but glassy, his chest heaving as he fought to stay conscious. The captain pushed the boat hard toward land, the engines roaring louder than the waves that slapped against the hull. On shore, paramedics met them at the pier. Lucas was moved quickly onto a stretcher, and intravenous lines were inserted before he was placed into the waiting ambulance. The hospital staff received him without delay, rushing him into surgery where torn muscles and deep punctures were cleaned and closed. Hours of steady work restored circulation to the limb, with doctors confirming that no permanent loss of movement was expected if recovery went as planned. His survival was credited to the quick actions of the crew, who distracted the predator and prevented it from making a second strike. News of the event spread rapidly, drawing attention from marine experts who emphasized the unpredictability of encounters with large predators near prey-rich waters. They explained that dangling limbs, combined with the activity of baitfish, can trigger sudden attacks from great whites. Although such strikes on parasailers were rare, the incident underscored how even controlled recreational activities could carry unforeseen dangers. In the days that followed, Lucas remained under close observation, His leg was wrapped in thick dressings supported by splints to limit strain. He was given physiotherapy exercises to begin early recovery, though the psychological impact was harder to mend. Nights brought flashes of the predator lunging upward, its immense body breaking the surface in a violent surge. For those on the boat, the memory lingered as well. Tourists returned home carrying stories that blurred the line between awe and fear, while local operators reviewed safety practices with new urgency. The sea off Gansbai remained as brilliant and alluring as ever. But for Lucas, its waters now carried a shadow. What began as a pursuit of beauty and thrill had turned into a lesson of survival. The horizon that once promised freedom would forever remind him of the moment when the ocean revealed its raw, merciless power. On September 6, 2023, the waters of Monterey Bay glistened under the California sun as Petty Officer Daniel Hayes prepared for another day of service. At 30 years old, Daniel was an experienced Coast Guard diver, known among his peers for his steady focus and tireless discipline. Born and raised near the Pacific coastline, he spent his childhood swimming, surfing, and developing a deep respect for the vast sea that would later become the foundation of his career. After years of training and rigorous drills, he had joined specialized units tasked with inspections, rescues, and recovery operations. His colleagues admired his ability to remain calm even when conditions grew hostile, making him a dependable figure during risky missions beneath the surface. That September morning, his assignment involved inspecting the hull of a sunken freighter resting in the bay. The wreck had been chosen for a drill designed to sharpen skills used during real emergencies, with divers tasked with examining damaged structures and recovering simulated evidence. The sea was relatively calm, and the team lowered itself into the water with practiced precision. Daniel moved ahead of the group, guiding his light across the hull's shadowy outlines while recording structural details for later review. As he worked, fish startled by the disturbance darted out from the wreckage. Their rapid movements attracted unseen interest from deeper waters, though the divers remained unaware. Daniel surfaced briefly to adjust his position, his body breaking the waves for only a moment before dipping back under. The shift of motion and the scent from disturbed marine life traveled farther than expected. From beyond the wreck, a sleek, short-fin mako approached, its streamlined form cutting through the water with astonishing speed. In seconds, the predator closed the distance. With a surge of power, it lunged at Daniel, its jaws raking across his shoulder and forearm. The strike was sudden and violent, tearing through fabric and flesh with razor-sharp precision. The force spun him against the wreck, knocking loose equipment as he struggled to free himself. His oxygen tank became tangled in the anchor lines, slowing his attempts to retreat. Panic spread among the team as the water around them filled with movement and blood. Divers armed with poles and fins struck at the predator, creating noise and resistance to break its focus. The mako twisted and circled, snapping with bursts of energy. But the constant blows eventually drove it back. For a moment, the water seemed suspended in chaos, every diver locked between fear and determination. Finally, the predator retreated, slipping into the depths with the same speed it had arrived. Daniel, still conscious but shaken, was dragged upward by his companions. His wounds bled heavily, red streaks trailing as he was pulled toward the waiting boat. The rescue had only just begun, but his survival depended on every second that followed. The deck of the vessel erupted into urgency as Daniel was hauled aboard, his wetsuit shredded and his body trembling from shock. Crew members worked quickly, pressing layers of bandages across his torn shoulder and forearm to stem the bleeding. The metallic scent of blood mixed with salt water filled the air as every hand moved with purpose. His pulse raced, his breath shallow, yet he remained conscious, gripping the edges of the stretcher as the team secured him tightly. Around him, the deck bore silent witnesses to the chaos. Scattered gear, bent poles, and the lingering red trails that marked the surface. Emergency calls were sent out immediately, with a medical evacuation unit dispatched from shore. Each passing moment felt longer as the vessel cut across the waves, its engine roaring toward land. Daniel's fellow divers sat in stunned silence, shaken by the speed and ferocity of the encounter. Many had trained for years to handle emergencies, but nothing prepared them for the sight of a mako surging with such explosive power. The water they had just left seemed suddenly more threatening, every ripple holding the memory of sharp teeth and violent movement. When the rescue team arrived, paramedics took control with practiced precision. Daniel was lifted carefully into a waiting ambulance, Intravenous lines inserted as gauze and pressure wraps reinforced the earlier dressings. The extent of the damage was severe, with deep punctures across muscle and tissue. But quick action had slowed blood loss enough for transport. The ride to the hospital was tense, marked by the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the muffled hum of tires on the asphalt. Surgeons worked for hours to repair the torn arm, stitching dozens of wounds and cleaning jagged cuts left by the predator's teeth. Damaged muscle required reconstruction, and nerve trauma meant his recovery would be long and uncertain. Still, the operation ended with cautious hope, as circulation was restored and the worst danger passed. Daniel's family, notified during the ordeal, arrived with heavy hearts, bracing themselves as updates trickled in. In the days that followed, the story spread quickly. News outlets reported the rare yet powerful attack, emphasizing the risks faced even by skilled Coast Guard units. Experts explained how sudden splashes and clusters of distressed fish near wrecks can draw predators in with lightning speed. For Daniel's colleagues, the event reshaped their understanding of training, turning routine dives into reminders of how little control they truly held beneath the surface. Daniel remained in recovery for weeks, his arm immobilized, his body adjusting to the scars left behind. Physiotherapy became part of his future, each session marked by slow progress and determination. Though shaken, his resolve never faded, a testament to the discipline that had defined his career. His experience became both a warning and a lesson, a story carried by those who served beside him, reminding all who entered the sea that no amount of training could erase the raw unpredictability of its fiercest hunters.